Now, with all the other facts and prophecies in the Bible being accurate, it would seem we should carefully consider the creation account, even if it differed from what science thought, just because of all these other facts that have been shown to be true. But the truth of the matter is, the account of creation in the Bible totally agrees with the sequence of events of creation according to science today. Now, if some of you want to take a Bible out and turn to Genesis 1, I'd like to review some of the important insights. Someone with a scientific mind will immediately be struck by two very important items. First, of course, we have the statement of initial conditions. And if you look in your Bible, you will find that in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth was without form and void. This is an initial conditions, state of conditions that a scientist will relate to. When you do an experiment, you always want to start with a set of initial conditions. Secondly, the Bible gives you a frame of reference. You will find, again, in first chapter of Genesis, God's Spirit was hovering over the surface of the waters, or some Bibles will say of the deep. But what that's telling you is the frame of reference from which to read Genesis is not some God out in the cosmos someplace, but it's a God whose Spirit is right at the surface of the waters. So this reference point will make all of the rest of the events of creation make sense, especially to a scientist. And third, I want to re-emphasize that the purpose of the Bible is not a science textbook. It was not to give us all the intimate details of creation. What it was the Bible was to deal with events that are significant to man. It also shows how God is involved with man, that he had a purposeful methodology in how he put things together. But the purpose of the Bible, of course, was not to give us a science textbook. You could have a textbook much bigger than the entire Bible doing nothing but talking about the events of creation. God's purpose was simple. How does creation affect man, and who was the master of creation? Just for a basis for understanding, I'd like to talk just a second about the basis for the young earth, old earth Christian conflict. The conflict is really rooted in the Hebrew words for day and the Hebrew words for morning and evening as translated in Genesis. See, biblical Hebrew really had only about 3,000 commonly used words, which of course is far, far fewer than the number of words we commonly use in the English language today. The Hebrew word for day is the word Yom, as in Yom Kippur. And what that meant usually was a literal 24-hour day, and hence it was translated as such in our modern Bibles. Yet it could also have meant a defined period of time, or an era, much like we might say in the day of the knights of old or something like that. Now, at the time of Moses, there was no suitable word to mean defined period of time other than Yom. So while young earth supporters will argue Yom meant a literal 24-hour day, old earth would argue that it was in fact a long defined period of time. There is really no other word that they could use. But don't let this young earth, old earth debate pull you off the track of the central issue, which is creation versus evolution. The God of the universe could have easily worked either within the laws of physics, which would be reflected in the scientific record, or a God could have transcended the laws of physics. Well, if we're going to take a look at the Bible as a source of authority for creation, which of course I believe we should, especially after reviewing the points about the incredible evidence of the accuracy of the Bible, what we need to do is take a look at the steps of creation in the Bible. And essentially there are 10 steps of creation listed in the Bible that actually agree precisely with science as we know it today. Let's talk about step one. Step one is pretty basic. Genesis 1:1. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Now the earth was formless and empty. The darkness was over the surface of the deep, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the waters. The heavenly bodies here were being created, and the initial conditions were that the earth was formless and void of creatures and that sort of thing. And of course, this precisely agrees with what science feels was the original condition of the earth. Now, did God do this through some big bang or some other process? It really doesn't matter. It could have been through a big bang, or he could have just created it. That is not the issue. Let's move to step two. Step two is in Genesis 1:3. And it says, "And God said, 'Let there be light,' and there was light." This would seem to be a contradiction or a problem for a scientist, because a scientist might say, well, wait a minute, if the heavens and the earth were created on the first day, are we saying here that all these stars and everything didn't have any light? Well, you have to consider again the frame of reference. God's Spirit was hovering over the surface of the waters. And then it starts to make perfect sense to a scientist, because most scientists would agree that the initial conditions of the earth was covered by very dense, dark gases that would not have allowed light to penetrate to the surface of the waters. So through some process that's not explained in the Bible, I think scientists might even differ on exactly how it happened, but through some process, the Earth's very dense, dark atmosphere was made to be translucent, so at least enough light could come to the surface of the earth to allow for such important things as photosynthesis and that sort of thing. Step three is in Genesis 1:6. Let's take a quick look at that now. "And God said, 'Let there be an expanse between the waters to separate water from water.'" What does that mean? To separate water from water. What this essentially is referring to is the development of the hydrologic cycle, or the water cycle. With light now reaching the surface of the deep, it allows for water to evaporate and create the clouds, which is the separation of the water above and the water below. This, of course, to a scientist, this is extremely important. This hydrological cycle, or water cycle, is a vital part of the ability to support the life that was to come next. Okay, step four is Genesis 1:9. Let's just read it real briefly. "And God said, 'Let the water under the sky be gathered to one place, and let the dry ground appear.' And it was so. God called the dry ground land, and the gathered water he called seas. God saw that it was good." Well, to a scientist that studies the formation of the earth, they would be in total agreement. What scientists will say is that at this point in the earth's history, there was a tremendous amount of seismic, earthquake type of activity, volcanic activity, which basically allowed the land to rise above the waters, and it separated the waters from the land. And the important thing is that land was required for man. It might be interesting to note that scientists have actually calculated that the ratio of land to water on the earth is the precise ratio that would allow for the maximum amount of life forms on a planet like Earth. So even down to details, and I could go through a number of other ones, it's amazing to me the precision of each of these steps and how it meets the needs of what God's intention was. Step 5. You'll find step 5 in Genesis 1:11. "Then God said, 'Let the land produce vegetation, seed-bearing plants and trees on the land that bear fruit with seed in it, according to the various kinds.' And it was so." The creation of vegetation during this third day, or third period,